So we see here that Jesus is once again in the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees, and it's on the Sabbath day, and he's there to share a meal. And, you know, in the Middle East and in many other cultures, to share a meal with someone was a very intimate thing. It was a very personal thing. It wasn't as casual as we make it out today. If you had a meal with someone, you were expressing some real interest in them. And you know, it's surprising to us that Jesus would even be here at this gathering, because we saw just a few weeks ago how he had been at another Pharisee's house and another gathering, and he had rebuked them very much. He had scolded them and exposed their hypocrisy for the way they were, you know, acting and what they were doing. So you wonder why Jesus would even come back to a situation like this, knowing that it was very likely going to be like the previous time. But you know, Jesus had enough love for people, and we need to remember this, that Jesus loved them enough to turn the other cheek. Jesus loved them enough to turn the other cheek. Often when we hear of that phrase of turning the other cheek in the Bible, we think of someone physically striking us. We take it very literally and say if someone harms us, you know, then you go ahead and, you know, and turn the other side. But do you ever think about emotionally turning the other cheek to someone who's, you know, they're going to mistreat you? Maybe you have to go back to a family situation or work or a neighborhood, and you just know when you go there, it may not be pleasant for you. And you have to be willing to go and make yourself vulnerable in that way. And this is what Jesus did. And I think one of the reasons that Jesus did this was not so he could show how noble he was and to prove some kind of point, but he had more to say to them. He loved these people very much. He had more to say to them that they needed to hear. It wasn't just that he wanted to get it off his chest, he wanted to unload, he wanted to prove a point. They needed to hear these words of instruction, listen, and correction and healing that he was about to speak. Just like us, when we come to the Lord, he has words of healing for us. He may need to correct us. He may need to straighten us out. But he has words for us that we need to hear. So this is why he was there. He knew that he had more to say to these people. Now, you wonder why they would have him there in the first place. I'm sure that there were people here who were suspicious of Jesus. We know they were always trying to trap him in his words or set him up somehow. There were people there who wanted to be critical of him, and they had all kinds of faults that they loved to make known about Jesus, at least in their own minds. They said he eats with sinners, he eats too much, he's hanging around with all the wrong people, he doesn't wash his hands, he works on the Sabbath. They had all kinds of criticism for Jesus. So there were some people there who were just suspicious and critical. There were probably some people there who were afraid of Jesus, because they knew Jesus was the kind of fellow that when he spoke, he exposed men's hearts. He revealed what's going on, just as he does when we come to church. How many times have you gone to a service or a sermon or even a Bible study or a home group, and the topic is exactly what you're dealing with at the time? God can use it to speak to you directly. Once, years ago, I didn't mean to tell this story, but I think it's pertinent, and I think maybe somebody here needs to hear it. There was a pastor who had hurt me. And it's not anybody you know, so don't say, oh, who was it? It's nobody that any of you guys know, so it wasn't even a Calvary Chapel guy. But this was years ago. And there was a pastor who I felt he had hurt me and even been dishonest with me. And as it happened, I had a friend who attended that church, and I had to drop off a beautiful 1964 Ludwig snare drum, right, for anybody who cares about that kind of thing. And I had to drop it off with this fellow. And I was dropping it off over at his house, and he said, meet me at the church. Well, I wasn't really interested in going into that church, I'll be honest with you, okay? But I did. And my friend was there, and I delivered it to him and all that. And they had a guest speaker that night. And the guest speaker who was there was speaking about Peter in the garden the night that Jesus was betrayed. And he said, Jesus took that sword and he hit the servant of the high priest, and he cut his ear off, and Jesus stepped in and intervened and healed the man. And he said, and Peter never apologized. Peter never admitted that he'd done anything wrong. And he said if that man had waited for Peter to apologize, he would have bled to death. And it was so timely for me to be in that situation, in that church that night, to hear a guest speaker saying, people are going to hurt you. You have to let Jesus step in and minister to you. The person who hurt you may never acknowledge it, admit it, repent, But you have to let Jesus step in and touch you and heal you, because Jesus wants to do that. So there were people here in this meeting that night who knew that when Jesus taught, He revealed men's hearts. I love the passage in Luke 2 when Simeon, remember when Mary and Joseph brought Jesus in? Remember when he was just an infant? And Simeon was there, and he blessed them and said to Mary his mother, "Behold, this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against. Yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed." And whenever we deal directly with Jesus through His Word and in fellowship, Jesus will reveal the thoughts of our very own hearts. And as my pastor Jerry used to always say, Jesus never does this to embarrass us, to humiliate us, to punish us, or put us down. He does it so we might find healing in Him. That's a good place to say amen. Because Jesus cares about you enough to heal you and love you and touch you and speak words to you to get you out of what kind of wrong thinking you might be in. So there were people there who probably were a little nervous about what Jesus might say or do. But I also want to say, I think there was another group of people here at this gathering who were probably very sincere about Jesus and wanted to hear what He had to say. Because there were many of the Jews, many of the Pharisees, many of the leaders who listened to Jesus. They believed in Jesus. We talked before about Joseph of Arimathea, who begged for the body of Jesus. We talked about Nicodemus, who came at night and wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. These were leaders among the Jews. And John 7 tells us that many from the crowd, when they heard Jesus speak, said, "Truly, this is the prophet." Others said, "This is the Christ. Who else could He be? Who else does this kind of thing? Who else, raises the dead? Who opens blind eyes? Who feeds the multitudes with the fish and the bread? Who walks on the water? Who commands the seas and the weather to obey Him? Who else could He be to do this kind of thing and speak this kind of truth?" But Simeon said He's there for the rise and the fall of many in Israel. And many of the mighty and the great ones, and even Herod himself and Pilate, who tried to wash his hands of the matter, they fell. Many of the Jewish leaders fell. The temple itself fell. But many who were outcast, who were lepers, who were rejected, the thief on the cross, they were raised up. They were brought up and people seated in heavenly places with Christ. So Jesus was there to minister. There were people who were suspicious. There were people who were afraid. There were people who were critical. But there were also people who were sincere and wanted to hear what He had to say. So it says in verse 2 that there was a certain man before them who had dropsy. Now dropsy is not so much a disease as it is a condition, and it means watery or water face. And what it had to do with, it could have been any number of diseases that people have that causes them to have a water retention, a fluid retention. And it affects their physical appearance. But it's usually fatal because it has to do with organ failure, maybe the kidneys, maybe the heart, but organs where you're retaining so much fluid that you're just not going to live, and it's very evident. Now Luke, being the doctor who wrote this, points out this condition that this man had, and Jesus asks a question. Now the theory is here that this man was probably put there in front of Jesus on purpose so that they would see what He might do if Jesus is going to, in fact, heal him. And of course the Jews thought that if He was healing someone on the Sabbath that He would be working and breaking the Sabbath. But Jesus answering, notice, He answered before they asked because He knows what people are thinking. He spoke to the lawyers and the Pharisees saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Now Jesus was not talking about the law of the Romans. He was talking about the law of Moses. He was talking about the Old Testament law. And Jesus never asks a question because He doesn't know the answer. Jesus, whenever He asks a question, whenever the Lord asks a question in the Bible, the Lord already knows the answer to the question that He asked. And He says, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" And in fact, it was actually the rabbis and not Moses who forbade healing on the Sabbath. Moses never forbade anyone to heal on the Sabbath. It was the laws that the Jews came up with later, and they put into the Talmud, and they had their traditions saying that you could do this, but you couldn't do that. But Moses never commanded not to heal anyone on the Sabbath. So verse 4 says, "But they kept silent." And I believe that some of the reason that they kept silent was they knew what they'd been taught. They knew what the rabbis said. They knew what the other leaders had said. But I think in their heart of hearts, they probably looked at this man and had pity. He was probably their neighbor. He could have been one of their relatives or one of their friends. How can you look at your neighbor, your relative, your friend, your coworker, maybe even somebody you don't like, and when they're having trouble, how can you not have pity on them? How can you not have mercy? Have you ever, let's be honest here for a minute, okay? Have you ever had someone that you really didn't like, maybe at work, okay? But all of a sudden, you find out that person is having a very serious problem. Maybe a death in their family, maybe a disease, some kind of real loss. And all of a sudden, your heart completely changes toward that person. And you see them at work and you're just full of pity. And you say, you know, I'm sorry I ever had a bad thought against you. So these people look at this man, probably their neighbor at least, if not one of their relatives or friends, and said, how can we not have some kind of compassion and mercy on him? But they kept silent. They didn't have anything to say. They didn't know what to say. Notice here, Jesus did not wait for their answer. Jesus did not wait for their opinion. Jesus did not wait for their approval. He didn't wait for chapter and verse from their writings. Jesus took him, healed him, and let him go. Jesus ministered to the suffering man. How many of us need to ask the Lord to teach us to see the suffering person in our midst? We all like to be with our friends. We all like to be with our peers. We all like to be with our favorite people. But how many of us even notice sometimes the suffering person that is right there in our workplace, our home, our neighborhood, wherever we might be, in our own church, our home fellowship group, our family even? Jesus saw him, Jesus took him, healed him, and let him go. I think one of the most merciful things that Jesus did here in this story is Jesus let him go. Jesus sent him away from the religious controversy. Jesus sent him away from the fake pretense. And this man probably went away healed, thinking about Jesus and what Jesus had done for him, and how that now his life was going to be absolutely different, and he actually had a future. He could plan, he could think. Who knows, he could have had a wife, children, a family, a business, a job, who knows. But now everything was different, and Jesus sent him away from all of these fake people. And you know, it's amazing to me how that sometimes when someone has really been saved and healed and set free and their life has changed, they don't really care that much about religion. Have you ever noticed that? And you want to get them into some kind of controversy about end times or eschatology or spiritual gifts or who knows what, or predestination, and they're like, I don't know. I don't care. All I know is I was blind and now I see. And you see that man in John 9, and he says, all I know is I was blind and now I see. And you know, it's that childlike faith. It's that childlike confidence and gratitude, I think, is the key word here. Gratitude that the man had and that the Lord wants us to have when we see God has touched me, God has taught me, God has changed me, God has put my life on a track. And what those guys want to sit and argue and nitpick and get out their theological tweezers and pick the text apart, I don't think the Lord's that interested in it. Come with the faith as a child. God will minister to us. So then Jesus answered them again. Notice he's doing a lot of answering and they're not saying much at all. Saying, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not answer him regarding these things. Because in Exodus 23 it says, if you even see your enemy's donkey with a heavy burden, help him out. If you see your enemy's ox going astray, you don't go, good for him. I hope he breaks his leg. No, you don't do that. It says take your enemy's ox and return him to your enemy. Do something nice for the person that doesn't even care about you. And see, this is exactly what Jesus was doing. He was in the midst of these Pharisees who didn't care about Jesus. We're trying to set him up for a trap. And Jesus was, to put it very mildly, Jesus was doing something nice. He was showing them the ways of God. He was bringing them the bread of life in their very, very midst. They could not answer him regarding these things. One of my favorite verses lately just seems to keep coming up in my life. Proverbs 21:30. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. And in these controversial days, when everybody's got an opinion and everybody wants to make a statement, this is a good verse to hang your hat on. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. We need to remember that. These fellows didn't have anything to answer Jesus about what he was saying, because they could see the truth not only in his words, but in his actions and in his deeds, and especially in the fact that he reached out to the man in their midst that none of them were reaching out to. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them. Now I want to stop right there and say, Jesus told the parable when he noticed how they were acting. When God sees your life, God will speak a word to you. When God sees the way we're living. And it might be a word of encouragement. It might be a word of blessing. How many times have you just been encouraged by the word of the Lord? And you open up and you see a verse and the Lord just reminds you that you're his child, that he loves you, that he cares about you, that he has a future and a place for you. Or how many times when your attitude is rotten or your actions stink and the Lord may give you a word of reproof. Have you ever seen that? That's one of the reasons that Psalm 73 is my favorite, is because it says, as for me, my foot had almost slipped. As for me, my foot had almost slipped, but the Lord corrected me. When I got my heart in the wrong place, when I got my head in the wrong place, the Lord intervened. Okay? So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them. See, they were watching Jesus. Guess what? Jesus was watching them. Jesus was watching them. He saw how they chose the best places. They were very self-centered people. They were in competition with one another. They were all worried about their reputation, their career, their rights. And God sees it when we act like that. And his word will always address our actions and our attitudes. God always sees us. So he says, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, and we have been, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man. And then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. See, it's easy to be excited when we've been invited. Amen? Say, oh, I'm so glad to be here. But we have to remember something. We were invited. We didn't get here on our own. Jesus said, I have chosen you. If the Lord hadn't made his way known to us and his truth made known to us, if he hadn't given us that faith, we wouldn't be here. We're only here because the Lord has called us. So we need to remember, we are here as guests of the Lord. Now, here, and I think this is very important, he's talking about the person who goes and sits in a seat. He chooses that seat for himself, but the master had already chosen that seat for someone else. So if we ever try to put ourselves in a place that was meant for someone else, God will remove us from there and put us somewhere else. And this is one of the problems that many of us have. It's not just, well, I mean, we could think about it at church. How many times have you seen someone in a church and they want to push their way to the front? They want to be the Bible teacher. They want to be the worship leader. They want to be the group leader. They want some kind of position. I'll tell you right now that I have had people, most of you guys don't even know about this, but there have been people that have approached me, that have come here, that I don't even really know. And they'll come to me, and like the first day that they're here, they let it be known to me that they are looking for a position. And I don't even know these people. They want to teach. They want to do everything else. And I'm thinking, are you serious? Are you really serious? You need to go read this chapter. You want to come in here and ask for some kind of position? I don't even know you. And you want some kind of position? But see, we can do that. How many times have you been at work and you've had the little boss? You know what I mean by the little boss? The guy who's not the boss, but he thinks he's the boss. Anybody ever know that guy? Right? Someone who tries to be the one who's in charge. Or it can be in a family, right? How many times you've had a sibling want to try to take mom and dad's place, right? That can happen, right? So it can happen in churches, it can happen in families, it can happen in jobs. But see, God has an authority and God has a hierarchy. It can happen in marriages. It can happen in marriages. You know, some of us went to the couples retreat yesterday, and Pastor Sandy was talking about how, you know, sometimes people in marriages get their roles reversed and they forget who's supposed to be leading. And the man won't lead, so the woman kind of has to, right? Or the woman tries to be the boss and tries to tell the man what to do all the time, and you end up with a big clash. And God has ordained for there to be leadership there from the husband. That's why He put him in that role and said, you need to lead and you need to be a leader so your wife doesn't panic and get frustrated and freak out because you're not leading. And the wife needs to trust the Lord enough to say that God has put my husband here and I need to trust God and my husband together in this role. But this can happen in so many different places in our lives when we want the prominence. We want the credit. Guys, you know, I played music for years, and sometimes being a musician is the worst thing in the world that can happen for a Christian. The ego, be up front, be the singer, be the musician, just being in the band, you know, you're there. You know, we used to go play festivals and stuff, and you know, people, let the band eat first. Oh, give them a free t-shirt. Oh, treat them like they're something. You know, we know we're just a bunch of jerks sometimes. But whenever we push for that prominence, when we want to be noticed, Gail Irwin says the bad thing about someone always wanting to be the winner is you force someone else to be the loser. And we are never, ever supposed to make someone else feel like or think like they are a loser. So Jesus said the first will be last and the last will be first. If we can really take this seriously enough to forget ourselves and put the other person first, that's the only way to forget about yourself. Because if you start thinking, I am so humble right now. Did you see how selfless I was? Did you notice I went to the back of the line? Did you notice I put myself last? Then we're still thinking about ourselves. We're just trying to impress everybody with how humble we are. The only way you can ever get out of that and get away from that is to truly start being your brother's keeper. Look at the needs of others. What does my brother need? What does my friend need? What does my spouse need? What does my family need? What do my neighbors need? What do my coworkers really need from me? How can I do that? And really put myself last and say, Lord, if it costs me, fine. If it makes me look stupid, okay. If it makes me look like a fool, so what? If it costs me money, yes, that too. If it costs me time, if I have to stay up late or I have to change my plans, so many ways. Put the other person first. And this is what these people weren't doing, and they were supposed to be the leaders in Israel. And the people were looking at these people and seeing how proud they were and how arrogant they were, and they loved the chief seats and they loved the greetings. I have known pastors who insisted on being called doctor just because they had their doctorate, just because they had their degree. And they insisted, even from little kids in the church, the little kid, they must call me Reverend so-and-so. They must call. I'm thinking, come on. I know I'm a little frustrated, but you know, the Lord gets frustrated with this. The Lord gets frustrated with it. Humble yourselves. Don't want the best seat and the best place and the title and all the attention. You know, one of the things I love about Jesus, one of the things, was the night that they came to arrest Him. And Jesus was with a bunch of fishermen from Galilee. And He was so normal looking, so ordinary, if you will, that they came to Jesus and were talking to Him and said, we are looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And they didn't even realize they were talking to Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am he. He didn't stand out. Gail says, they didn't tell the soldiers, get the one with the halo. He was a very normal thing. In fact, the prophets tell us that he had no form or comeliness that we should desire him. He wasn't impressive in that way. And that's so that everyone could relate to Jesus. And if we ever set ourselves up in some way, we set ourselves aside or above other people, that they can't relate to us, that they're overly impressed with us, and they can't just trust us as a friend or a brother or a neighbor, then we're missing the point. See, the Lord humbled himself. And that's actually the next text I wanted to look at. And many of you know this very, very well. Philippians 2:5. Paul was writing this from prison. And he says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death of the cross. See, Jesus took the form of a bondservant. What was a bondservant? We talked about this back in Exodus 20 at our Wednesday night study. The bondservant was the man whom the master, he was a slave. He'd been bought because of his debts. And he said, and the master said, you can go free if you want. But the bondservant said, no, I love my master and I want to stay in his house. And the master would take that servant to the house and pierce his ear through with a tool, with an awl on the doorpost of the house. And he would say, I'll serve my master forever because I love him. I can go free, but I don't want to go free. I want to dwell here in this house forever. And Jesus took that form of a slave that had been bought. And he says, let this mind be in you. We are bought with a price. It's not ours. It's not my reputation that is at stake here. It's God's reputation. It's not my ministry. It's God's ministry. It's not my career. Not my children. God's. They all belong to the Lord. My gifts, my talents, my abilities, my dreams, whatever. It's God's. Let him steer. Can you trust him with that? Can you really just let it be in his hands and trust him with that? And then wherever he leads you, whatever people he leads you to, like this man with the watery face, he probably looked strange. Probably a little awkward for people to be around him. And yet Jesus wasn't ashamed to be with him. Jesus wasn't, weirded out or made uncomfortable in some way that Jesus didn't want to be with this man. Jesus went straight to the man. So, forget ourselves. I know it's harder than it sounds, but with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can do this. We can say, Jesus, let me focus on you. Let me focus on my neighbor. You remember what John said, don't you? John the Baptist. He said, he must increase. I must decrease. Let us truly, truly learn to live like that. Paul warns that in the end times, and I want you to turn to 2 Timothy 3. You guys are going to love me. We'll probably get out of here early today. 2 Timothy 3. He's talking about the end times and what people will be like. And it's interesting that he says that these are people who appear to be religious, right? But look here. 2 Timothy 3, Paul is warning the young pastor. Paul is on his way out of the world at this time. He's in prison and he knows he's about to be put to death. And he's warning a young pastor about things that are to come. He says, but know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. Perilous, dangerous times. And these are spiritually dangerous times. We don't, often when people talk about the end of the world, they talk about the blood up to the horse's bridle and a third of the seas being poisoned and a third of the plants being killed and wars and rumors of wars. But this is perilous spiritually because there's a great deception that goes on in the end times. And there are many people who will be fooled and deceived. Look what he says. Know this, and in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be takers of selfies. I'm sorry, that's not what it said. It says, men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters. Wow, boasters. I get busted on that all the time. You know that? I was telling my 6-year-old granddaughter, I'm going to tell on myself, okay, so you guys forgive me, bear with me. My granddaughter is 6. She's in the 1st grade. She's really bright. And I was telling her, she asked me how to spell a word. And I told her how to spell a word, and I said, did you know that when Papa was in school, that I was 2-year spelling champ at my school? Which is true. You know what my 6-year-old granddaughter told me? She said, Papa, that's bragging. Okay. I said, well, I was telling you so if you ever need help, I could help you spell, but you just blew that out. So, but she was right, and I got so busted. And, what a shame that you have to brag to a 6-year-old. Oh, yeah, but don't we do that? Look, social media is just full of bragging, isn't it? I met so-and-so. I went here. Look at my new item I bought. Check this out. How do you like my hair? Whatever. I'm sorry. I got off on another little trail. Forgive me. Men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power, and from such turn away. He says here that in the end times, all these things will be evident. And I think one of the most brutal truths about our society and about these people that Paul describes here is that they are unthankful. Unthankful. Jesus said, when you're invited to a wedding feast, stop thinking about yourself. You were invited to the wedding feast. Shouldn't our gratitude for the fact that we are there in the first place be the overwhelming, amazing part of the event, that you're invited, that you are even there, that you're overcome with gratitude, that you were invited by the Master? When we're here, we didn't get ourselves here. The Lord said, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The Lord said to 2 fishermen who didn't know what they were doing, follow me. And that's what He's saying to every one of us. Follow me. He has invited us. And if we can just have that gratitude, then we'll stop trying to one-up each other. Because let me tell you, our society, our world is full. There are people laying in their beds this morning. There are people having another drink this morning on a Sunday. They're watching TV, trying to find something to do, making a plan, in bed they shouldn't be in, because they don't want to be with those Christians that they think don't love them. Now, I'm not trying to be hateful or harsh, but the truth is that when Paul talks about these people in the end times who are lovers of self and proud, that often they're just like these Pharisees here who are always looking for the best seat for themselves, always trying to one-up, outdo, cut down people. And people already feel like losers. Why should they hang out with other people that make them feel worse? So we say, Lord, help me be so grateful that you have invited me to the wedding feast, that I am willing to take the low seat, do whatever it takes, so that someone else can find a place here, so that someone else can find their peace with you. The Lord is saying, let God choose your place in the kingdom. Now, think about that for a minute. God, are you bought with a price? Are you bought with a price? Are you purchased by the blood of the Lord? Then does God have every right to choose where He puts you? God might choose to put you in a high place. Look at Joseph. We studied Joseph for a few months in Genesis. And God chose to bring Joseph to a high place, right? Put him in Pharaoh's house. God chose Moses, picked him up, put him in Pharaoh's house. David, the shepherd boy, became the prince and then the king. God picked him up and put him up in a high place. Daniel, taken as a slave, taken as a captive, and ended up an ambassador, prophet, right? But think about this. God also has the right to choose your low place. What if God chooses to put you in a low place? Is that okay with you? Is that okay if you get demoted? Is that okay if you get busted? Is it okay if you lose your job? Or, God uses a sickness in your life, or God uses a hardship in your life, or a move, or a relocation, or anything, and God chooses that as part of His plan for you. Are you okay with that? Listen to these same men that I mentioned. God chose to put Joseph in prison. And Joseph even was able to say later, Lord, the thing that He told his brothers, the thing that you meant for evil, God meant for good. So the same list that I just gave you, Joseph, God also had him in prison. Moses, the Lord also had him in the wilderness. David was also running from Saul, hiding out with the Philistines, living in a cave. Had his own son turn against him, had to leave Jerusalem. Daniel was cast to the lions. And then we see Paul and Jesus and so many that the Lord chose a place of humiliation, chose a place of humbling, chose a place of hardship, but He also chose a place of exaltation. So we have to trust the Lord with that. And I honestly believe, guys, that I spent so much of my younger years trying to make a career for myself, trying to find my place in this world, trying to earn that respect, trying to get whatever it was, whether it was make enough money, live in the right house, write the music, play in the band, produce the project, whatever, do all these things just for some kind of recognition so I could even be proud of myself, if nothing else. But the Lord here is saying, take the low seat. Let God pick you up. God has every right to put you where He wants you to be. Let Him choose. Are you willing to let God choose your place, whether it's high or low? Trust Him with it. Listen, if it's high, it'll be great. You know what? If it's low, He can use that too. And you may learn more in that valley and more in that breaking and more in that humbling than you ever learned in the prosperous times. Trust Him with it. Then He said also to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. Hey, they're going to. They want you to come back. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Would you rather men repay you, or would you rather God repay you? Would you rather have the honor that comes from this world, or would you rather have the honor that comes from the Lord? You know, one time when I lived in Hendersonville, I thought this was the craziest thing. I went to a yard sale, just a yard sale. You know, you guys know I love junk stores and flea markets and that stuff. I went to a yard sale. Guess what I saw at these yard sales? And they were selling them for like nothing. Gold records in picture frames. Gold records like you'd hang in an office, like people would die for something like that. At a yard sale. Who sells a gold record at a yard sale? But the point of it all is I saw that and I thought, the things that people strive for and clamor for and spend all the years of rehearsal and practice and all kinds of other things to do to get that gold record. And where does it end up? In a yard sale. Next to the exercise equipment. And the old shoes that you don't want anymore. And the out-of-date furniture. A gold record. The things that men prize so highly can fall away so quickly. You drive by the junkyards. You ever drive by the junkyards and see those cars? Wow, remember when that thing was so cool? Remember that? Remember that? Cadillac, Porsche, Mercedes, Trans Am, Corvette in a junkyard. Trashed, wrecked, nothing to it. The things we love so much, they're worthless. Let God be the one who rewards you. Jesus said, when you invite this, look, I just want to look for a minute at the list of people Jesus said to invite. Invite the poor. They can't pay you back. They don't have money to throw a feast. They don't have wealthy friends or influence. But God will pay you back if you invite them. What about maimed? Wow, that's kind of serious, isn't it? Those people are embarrassing. Someone who's maimed, someone who's injured, that's kind of awkward even to be around those folks. You ever been around somebody who's got like a serious deformity or been in a bad wreck or something or an injury? You go, wow, that's kind of awkward. Invite the awkward. Invite them. Don't be embarrassed and ashamed of them. Lame. Invite the lame. They can't even get there. They'll need your assistance. They can't walk. You might have to go pick them up. Physically, literally. People who can't even get themselves there, you go out of your way to make sure they can get there. Serve them. Get them there. The blind, I think this is very interesting. The blind are not impressed by your big party. They can't see the fancy decorations. They can't see the food presentation. They can't see everyone's clothes and their best, coiffed hair or whatever they might have. They don't see it. They're blind. It's wasted on them, so to speak. But invite them anyway. Invite people that can't necessarily even appreciate what they've been given. But isn't that what God does? Who does God invite to His wedding feast? Blind people that can't see and can't appreciate what they've been given. People who are awkward and embarrassing. People who are lame and can't get themselves there. People who are poor and have nothing to repay. Have no influential friends or no means to throw their own party. That's what God has done. He's invited us to His feast.